Welcome to another episode of Untethered Talks. I recently conducted an interview with Cristian. Ryan is the writer and editor of the Last American Vagabond news site and podcast. Ryan is the recipient of the Serena Shim Award for uncompromising integrity in journalism. In our interview, Ryan and I discussed several very important issues like the COVID shots, gender ideology, the Maui fires, neo-Nazi funding by the CIA, the ADL, and insects being used as bioweapons. So without further ado, let's dive right in.
Well, Ryan, welcome to the show. I appreciate you for being here, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. Well, I looked over a lot of your work, and you have a lot of really important things to say about the mRNA vaccines that we deal with these days. Can you tell me what you think the end game is for the government and big pharma regarding COVID-19?
So not this. Well, I guess that includes the injections too. But I guess you could take that a few ways. But I guess my opinion would be clearly that there's not just one agenda. I think first of all, there's a lot of multifaceted agendas that are, different parts of the power structure are more invested in. But I think overall, what we've clearly seen is that there's been a long sought plan to use either the threat of or actual pathogens to scare people into a place where they are more conducive to control by their government. And I think Derek Burrows did a really excellent article about this. It was entitled Lockstep. I forget the title, but it was in regard to what's called parasite stress theory. And it's a very important study that the more than one has been done, but this one was really important in regard to just before the illusion of the pandemic and how the government had studied specifically, essentially how populations find their way into being under the control of an authoritarian state, and then rather how to make that happen and how it ends up happening in, throughout history. And one of their clearest findings was that all they really need is not even a real thing, simply the threat of the possibility of a pathogen that's dangerous. And people will immediately relinquish their rights. They will tell on their neighbor. They will accept all sorts of violations under this guise. And it's one of the only things they've pinpointed as something that people will not only allow that, but ask for those things. And we've seen that throughout COVID-19. So I think if I had to put a pin on it, again, hear me on the fact that I could go off on 1,000 different agendas that I think are all operating from very high levels, but really just about putting people in a place where they're unsure and they need an authority figure to do things to keep them safe. And that will open the door, which has already happened, to all sorts of alarming technocratic control measures and long-lasting, never-ending, temporary secure measures, which we saw from the Patriot Act and 9/11. This is just another extension of that. But if you'd like, I can go in a lot of different directions, but I think that's the really obvious way to look at that. And people within the government might not even be fully aware that that's even happening. I'm willing to bet there's plenty of people, and this is not to give them a pass, in the government that believe they might be doing something terrible for a greater good. I think there's more than those than we realize, but that still makes them bad people in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, COVID-19 is really the reason why I'm doing a video channel, because, I've always been watching this kind of content from a few years. And but when I saw what they did in 2020, I'm like, I don't, even if my voice is very minuscule and doesn't have much reach, I got to do something. So that's why I started to do my video channel. And I
applaud you for that, man. I think that's important. More the better. We need everybody out there speaking their minds. It takes courage. So I applaud that.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, man. So I have another question. Do you know of any natural remedies or ways to reverse spike protein production in the body for those who got the COVID shots?
Yeah, I'm not the one. I'm aware of a lot of different things. I would prefer not to even speak on it because I wouldn't want to mislead somebody, but there's all sorts of natural. The one thing I would say is natural, in my opinion, is better in every possible way. And I even mean that in the sense of efficacy in my research. Truly, when you factor in the side effects and all the different, kind of compromised positions a lot of these people are in when they're behind the intent of these measures and the materials and the interventions. But I know people like Dr. Peter McCullough has been really adamant about this. I know he's got things he's publicly listed. So if you're interested, I know on his platforms, and it's all public and free. And I'll even go further to point out, and this is what I appreciate, is that he, in the last time he talked about this, was like, I'm not selling that. Here are ways you can find all of these things naturally for sale anywhere you look. Like, that to me is not somebody who's trying to, corner the market and make a profit off of this, which by the way, even if they did, I don't see a problem with that if they're doing it from a good place, trying to help people, but to me, I think it's really about a lot of the natural ways we've always talked about: detoxification, healthy diet, these things. If your body, here's the best way to put it from where I'm coming from. If your body is healthy and maintained and you have a very strong immune system, even very dangerous things for most people, well, I wouldn't say, for a lot of people, will pass you by. And we forget to think about that, or we forget to make note of that, where things, whether the flu or anything else, if you're out there and believe those things are real, that they ultimately, they can pass right through you, and that you can actually have pathogens go through your body, and you won't. It's not that you're asymptomatic; it's that you just never got sick. See, this is a game they played during COVID where they said, oh, well, they could be asymptomatic, and they kind of conflated that with anybody who might be shown to have some of this in their body with a PCR test turned up to massive amplification, which doesn't really mean that you're sick. That's Kerry Mullis made that very clear. So that we forget that, So my point is, your immune system is strong. It will fight these things off. It's designed to do that. Your body is the best defense. But yeah, you seek those things out. There's a lot of people. I think Del Bigtree has made a lot of comments about that. And there's people out there, like, I would really recommend Peter McCullough if I had to pick somebody.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I know he had a lot to say about that, and I think he got banned as well on some things. Here's the next question. Do you believe that the QAnon movement is a government psyop?
Absolutely. 100%, without question. I know my opinion would be, there's always a possibility. Being objective, I can always say that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a bigger picture that I don't see, or there's information that I haven't yet to review. Always possible. And I also would add this. I've been saying this from the moment this started, before it was even called Q. Follow the White Rabbit. I've been really following the story from the very beginning, before it was even turned into now. And I do have the suspicion, or rather the sense, that there was something there. That maybe there was people that were really trying to do X, Y, and Z. And I don't know, because I think we clearly see that it changed and it shifted. And even regardless, my point is, we should always want that, in the sense of, like, the narrative around, Donald Trump he's really doing this to save everybody from the bad guys. And my point is, there was a lot of people that were so, like, overwhelmed with their hatred for Donald Trump that they would actually hope the country failed so he could be the bad guy. My point is, whether I don't like Donald Trump or not, wouldn't we all want that to be the case, that he wants to save everybody and he's the good guy? So my point is the same thing. It's like, sure, I hope that that's the truth. I hope there's white hats that are fighting for the truth. They're going to break all this and put everyone in jail. Please. I just don't think it's real. I think it's very clear. We've seen FBI involvement. We've seen a lot of documents come out, and not even to mention how often the things that they swear to you are going to happen don't ever actually happen, and the narrative shifts, and the goalpost is moved, and it's just over and over. I don't think anybody who has real objectivity and is an honest investigator is taken by QAnon anymore.
Yeah, I remember people bringing out the fact that 100 years ago in Russia, they had Operation Trust, which is basically what they did is almost exactly what they did with
Trust
QAnon.
the plan.
And they've done this in a couple other South American countries as well. So that's why, and I always had suspicions because, and this is when my wife was with me, she started to tell me about this, and I'm like, I don't know. And then, like, when she said Jeff Sessions was secretly, releasing indictments on pedophiles, I'm like, no, I think this is a lie. So yeah. He's not secretly that much of an amazing buster of criminals.
He's not an amazing anything, in my opinion. But what's important though is that wouldn't we all want that? Like even again, my point is, I think he's an absolute provable POS that's been completely. The guy, when he was there, was trying to put people in prison for life for cannabis. You know what I mean? Like, but wouldn't we, if that was actually the truth behind it all, that he really was trying to, my point is, we should want that. But that's not really the truth. It's obviously more to that. And it's funny how you go from General Flynn to Bill Barr to Sessions and whoever is the trust the guy of the day. He's going to save us all. And now he's the big villain. It's like, we can see that these people at the very least don't even trust their own information. It's just jumping to the next statement that they're trying to decode. It's frustrating.
Yeah, I think it's really insidious because it basically, the message is, don't do anything. Someone will do it for you.
Exactly.
And when you do that, that usually leads to something bad, because if you don't take responsibility for your own life, don't expect someone to be virtuous enough to do it right for you.
Right. I agree.
Someone will take control of you. It just won't be what you want. So,
yeah.
Anyway, So what are your thoughts about gender ideology, and what do you think the origin of the movement is?
Well, of gender ideology in general, I mean, I would say that's different than the transgender movement. But overall, I would say that I think that it's a clear problem. I mean, I've been covering this for a long time. My real core stance in any of this stuff is, if you're an adult, you can do what you want with your own body, the whole 9 yards. Like, unless you are breaking the law, putting people in danger, or doing this to children, you know what I mean? Like pressuring or do any of this overlapping with children. Like, if you want to do this to your body and call yourself whatever you want, do it. I mean, I'll even go so far as to call you what you want, unless you're forcing me to do that. You see, and there's a big line there for me. I don't care. It's just about respect. If you're just somebody who I mean, but look, I guess the point would be also that I definitely feel that there's a problem there, and I over the years, I've been a little reluctant to come out and, again, I want to err on the side of liberty. You know what I mean? Like, because there's a lot of people out there that just have what, in my mind, I would see as weird proclivities or even mental issues, but it's their choice, right? But so the point is that there's people like that are getting demonized by people on the right, in this case, or however you look at it, just because they're part of it, even going as far as to call, like, gay people in general part of some weird thing. And so that's the overrepresentation, the overreaction by the paradigms. That's always how it goes. So my point is, those people are part of that. But within all of this, you can see that there's a few things that are important to mention, which is, yes, there's obviously some kind of an issue here that I think needs to be dealt with. And I mean, in the sense of like therapy and because that's my personal opinion, even coming from a religious standpoint, which I don't get into a lot, because I don't think my opinion matters when it comes to people's personal choices. The moment this began to be something that was forced on everybody, that was forced into mainstream, you have to call me this, you're going to go to jail, the children started to be pressured and influenced in schools. I mean, everybody who is honest about this conversation can see that it's inappropriate at the very least. Then you get into the idea that puberty blockers and hormones, there's no long-term data on any of this stuff. And now, because of work, a lot of people, myself included, it's started to recede, because they're going, wait a minute, there isn't long-term data. Oh, look at that. There's infertility, there's long-term bone issues, there's strokes and all. I mean, it's just unbelievable how much evidence is shown to the things they're giving children. Even admitting the point is that puberty blockers will keep them in, most of them will be infertile. They won't be able to reproduce. And they're saying that's just their choice. So we're allowing children to make long-term life choices. I mean, I could go off forever on this topic. I think the agenda stems back to a few things. And I don't mean this, that's why I thought it was important to point out, like, the difference between this movement right now, which I think is very disingenuous. There's a lot of political money and dark actions behind a lot of this stuff. But I think the agenda is about, and this might shock some people, but I do genuinely think there's a core point of this overlap to transhumanism. I believe there's an effort to try to open this door to altering your body in ways. And, we even talked about the implantables and that kind of stuff. That's the Great Reset direction. This is all happening. So that's my personal opinion. But I also do think that there's a little bit of an overlap when it gets into some perversion. There's a very clear issue when it comes to sexual perverts and sexual deviants using this movement to seek to hide. And this isn't my opinion. I mean, it's everywhere. You can prove this left and right. People in prisons deciding to go transgender and then raping people in prison, or doing the same thing outside, or abusing certain areas. The YMCA has all sorts of reports about this. So all that, none of that's to say that every single person in this movement is like that. I think there's genuine people in there that think they're fighting for good, but overall, I think it's a big problem. And I think it's being used by a lot of bad people, and the long-term agenda could ultimately be kind of just like destabilizing, dividing, a lot of different things, right? But I mean, again, it's hard to encapsulate in one answer, but there's a lot of ways to go in this, and I do definitely think it stems to some pretty dark things. But again, I don't think we should sweep in every single person involved with this as part of something. That goes for any topic we're discussing.
Yeah, I think we have to take a strong stand against children being pushed into that, or even being talked to about that. That conversation should never happen to anybody that's not at least 18.
Absolutely. Parents need to be the ones making these decisions. There's no line where children somehow are open. Like, I mean, we don't even need to get into all the things that they're claiming are acceptable, openly talking about sexual positions and all sorts of things. I mean, it's a clear, the point I made in my show is an obvious step from educational biology to sexual, whatever you want to call it. Like, if you're discussing sexual acts with a child who is prepubescent, it's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. They're not even mentally able to really grasp what those things mean. And you're now setting this table for them. So they're going to grow into this mindset. It's manipulation. Like whether they think they're doing it from a good place or not, which I don't think most of them are, quite frankly. Even most of it's political, I honestly believe. And some of them are much more dark, but it's a problem for sure.
Yeah, I personally believe it's because they can't reproduce, that they're trying to go for younger and younger audiences so that they can continue to create, transgender people for whatever they need. So,
there's a part of that right there that I don't think that's the majority of the topic, but I do think there's a part of this. And I discussed this when it comes to the idea of endocrine disrupting chemicals. Right. And this is where it gets overlapped with this Alex Jones, frogs gay, kind of, in my opinion, designed to bury the topic in something that's the ridiculous, because it's always been a real topic. Now they've even shoehorned in sweeped in RFK's comments and act like it's still about only atrazine and frogs. The point is, even RFK has been very clear about this. It's coastline to coastline, man. It's around the world. We have everything you could possibly list right now, from the vaccines, glyphosate, dioxins, PFAS, all these things that are throughout our water systems. They're causing disruption in our endocrine system. It's documented. And what does that do? Multiple peer-reviewed studies have found that directly leads to, or it can, gender dysphoria. So my point is, yes, that's happening. And then I've even proven that there are discussions. There's articles written about, hey, we could let this happen. What a positive thing. It's actually bringing out their true selves. Like, that's an actual argument made by some people. So you're not wrong. That is absolutely part of this.
Yeah. I thought it was pretty sad that, the gay frogs thing got so, hyped, because that was a real issue that should have been talked about seriously many years ago. And it takes a very calm Democrat that has a little bit of common sense to actually make it sound like a legitimate thing that it really is. So, now I haven't really followed the Maui fires a lot, but I've seen that you have. Based on your research, what do you think caused those fires?
I would be completely guessing on what caused them. I mean, there's all sorts of theories, I looked into the topic of directed energy weapons, which again shouldn't be dismissed. They're very real. They've been studied and executed since, for 30 years now. They've been openly talked about. You can show evidence of them and so on. And so my research showed that there was a directed energy directorate on Maui. And there's one in New Mexico, and there's one on the coastline. I forget the name of the mountain range in Maui. I just thought that was an interesting point, right? And of course, that gets kind of overwhelmed. If there's people out there that will run with anything and make up all sorts of narratives about whatever they want to sell you on what they want you to look at. But I think that there's interesting anomalies that might suggest that there was that kind of a weapon used. But other than that, I haven't seen anything conclusive. So I kind of left it where it was until more comes around. But to me, if I had to pick something, I think that it's very clear. You can show that the Hawaiian Electric only spent about $250,000 the entire year on wildfire safety, upkeep, and so on, and then put everything they had into the green kind of directions of their own statements, right? And that left, and that you could show the videos of the energy poles waving and collapsing, and so they say that did start fires. They say that got put out. The reason they claim they don't know what the other part of the fire started from is because it happened on a different area. So there could be more power lines. They say, to this day, they still say, oh, we don't know. So there's a huge anomaly right there. The way they handled this, turning off the water, not allowing the sirens to go off, holding people in areas where they later died, which you can prove. All of this is very, very strange. In my opinion, there's something very dark going on there. But it could simply just be land grabs. I mean, today we have this characteristic of kind of the movement where we tend to miss the forest for the trees. Some people do, and we rightly should be asking for larger things, because before it used to be the other way around, where that's conspiracy theory. We don't talk about that. And you only focus in on how much money and the oil, and now it's kind of flipped. So it's like we need to be objective and do both, right? Obviously, we can't miss the fact that there is money involved here. There's land grabs involved. The smart city conversation, all these things, they're not ridiculous. There's very clear evidence that there was, or at the very least, that people might have either turned the other way, not looked, allowed things to happen so they could take advantage. That's happened throughout history more times than we like to talk about. But then, so that's the part we shouldn't miss. We could arrest people, in my mind, for that right now. The way Hawaiian Electric didn't do what they should have, the multiple series of actions that led to people dying. Why aren't they in jail for these things? I think because most people are going direct energy weapons. Look at the blue roofs. Look at all these things over here. And then we stop focusing on what we can currently prove. We need to do both, But other than that, I think it's a lot of hyperbole and guessing, but we should still keep asking these questions. But, like East Palestine, I think we can prove it now that they broke the law.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think at the very least, they intentionally neglected that area so that they could try to do a land grab. So
what the evidence shows, I don't think we can prove that, but any investigator worth their salt, that'd be pretty much the only place you're looking right now. Everything points in that direction.
Yep, definitely. All right, now I saw something that you talk about. You said that the CIA is trying to infiltrate America with neo-Nazis. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I that's not exactly. Now, there's been people that have come on the scene as the last month or so, acting like they're breaking the story, and that's kind of been the way that they've, they put it in a really partisan overlap and made it about, it just the real story is, in my opinion, based on the evidence, that for a long time, and this even like an overlap would be Afghanistan, the Mujahideen, and the Soviet Union, where the CIA and the U.S. government used these people. Charlie Wilson's War is like a romanticized version that gives you no facts about that story so people can place it, where they funded these people who they acknowledged were, at the very least, what we now call terrorists or call, militias or whatever, that they funded them to mired the Soviet Union in the issue there, which some people argue was the beginnings of the end of the Soviet Union, right? And so that's kind of the game the CIA's always played. And so you can prove, it's called Project Aerodynamic. They did this in Ukraine. They funded the Organization for Ukrainian Nationalists, which you can look up right now, and you can even see these obvious ties to this, what they are. They're the outward kind of fascist level overlap of what the nationalist movement was in this country. They're not, people always conflate nationalism and fascism. They're not the same thing. You can be a nationalist and not be a racist, right? But in this case, they funded those people. They chose the ones that were the extremists, the racists, the extremists. And then they picked a guy named Mykola Lebed, who was in prison in Poland as a Nazi war criminal, not a neo-Nazi, a Nazi. Like, he was an actual Nazi war criminal. They rescued him and they put him up in New York and in Ukraine, head of both these locations, called Prologue. It was a media company. It blows my mind. So they were literally allowing a Nazi right that close to the war, past the World War II, to see not whatever he wanted, using this media company information to the American people and in Ukraine. Now, the point is, long story short, that was the beginnings of what became what we see today as the Azov movement, right sector, that has flourished throughout Ukraine. And as anybody with two eyes can see and a brain to look at it, or a brain to process it, that they were covering this before the invasion. All of them, every corporate outlet, they're Nazis, they're bad guys, they're corrupt, and then suddenly it all goes away. So the point coming to the United States is that it's been my opinion, based on all the evidence we have, that they have been using these neo-Nazis, one, to pull in Russia, just like the Afghanistan discussion, but also using these people in both in the United States, in Germany, in Italy. We've already seen examples of this. They're funded by the CIA, whether knowing or not, and then blaming Russia for that. And deliberately trying to lay breadcrumbs back to Russia, which we've already broken down. And this person we're not going to talk about wasn't, are just kind of clumsily pointing at the surface level story. If you get into the information, you can see that this has been a long set narrative and a long set idea, that they wanted it to be Russia was the one doing this in Ukraine. It's seeded in the United States. And they want to use this to justify all we've been seeing, the rise of white supremacy, the domestic terrorism. A couple of the points are important, and then I'll stop because I can go on about this forever. That you have to remember that the Azov movement is, you can see the direct connections to this agenda and what started in Charlottesville. Charlottesville was the beginning of the Republican MAGA, they will not replace us, replacement theory, all this kind of racist overlay. That's where that all started. Even the cars hitting protesters started with that day. That was the Rise Above movement in the Waffen division, both of which tied directly back to the Azov movement, which is the CIA-funded group. The Azov movement has 3 international arms. There's one in Germany, there's one in Italy, and there's one in the United States. The international arm in the United States, publicly, is the Rise Above movement. So you can prove very easily that the CIA funded this group, which later had this protest, right down to the same tiki torches, or rather torches, and everything they were doing. And that was then supposed to be Russia. They even tried at that point. But the point was the narrative kind of collapsed. And all of these different points can very clearly tie this back to what we just saw recently with Christopher Polhas in Florida, with the guy behind him Kent McClellan, the Boneface, all of these guys also tie right back to the Azov movement. So now you're starting to see people set up in the United States. I'm telling you, we're still going to see this happen. They're going to blame Russia for this, and the effort's going to be to try to blame them for infiltrating the United States when it's been your government the entire time. And there's so many more things to talk about in that topic, but
oh man, so I'm just going to recap this real quick. So the CIA is funding Azov in America, uses it for Charlottesville to, I guess, get the whole division thing going with white supremacy and things like that. And then they funded in the Ukraine as well. So
it starts in the Ukraine and then essentially bled out into these other locations. And I think the design was ultimately to destabilize these areas, to use them like the same way they do anywhere else. And I think the long-term agenda is to try to tie this back to Russia, to use that as the excuse. You get this, there's a group that ties right back with these people. It's called the Base. Operates out of St. Petersburg. Do you know what the Base is? You know what the translation of Al Qaeda is into English? The Base. Wow. Literally the translation. This group is run by a former top secret clearance DHS government individual who woke up one day and said, I want to be a white supremacist, moved to Russia and started a white supremacy group. I mean, what else do we need to see? I mean, these people tie back to the same entities. It's like, this is all an operation. And I think they're trying to patch this together, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm personally, I'm not big on Putin or anything, but it really pisses me off. Yeah, I mean, it really pisses me off when we do stuff through the U.S. and we try to blame it on Russia. That really pisses me off. So just my personal feeling, because I just want the truth. I mean, if Russia's doing it, that's fine. But if you're just doing this because you want to get more military contracts, beef up that military industrial complex money, then you're evil, in my opinion. So.
And for all that stuff, though, I recommend, nothing I said there, other than when I say it's my opinion, it's all provable, all of it. So at the very least, if we know that you can tie direct funding to this day from the CIA, even from the U.S. Congress, how they've more than once openly funded the Azov movement, even though their own legislation says that's a crime, easy to prove, even if it's indirectly, and they do it anyway, right to this very day, and then can prove that the Rise Above movement is the international arm of the Azov movement, which it is, it's public. You can look it up on Wikipedia, for crying out loud. Then that's right. That alone is something that the U.S. government's aware of. They know we see that. That's aligned directly to the CIA and a group that they're still pointing at. Biden talks about Charlottesville all the time as the reason we need to do this and the domestic terrorism. It's very simple. I just don't think people want to see this stuff.
Wow. Well, that's a bombshell, man. I'm glad that you saw that, because I need to look at that more. All right. I'm sure you'll like this one. What are your thoughts on the ADL and what they are doing to free speech in America?
Well, it's an interesting topic because the ADL in general, it's, in my opinion, it's a dishonest organization. At its core, what you're trying to do is censor people. I'll always say that I think in any organization, the WHO, the CDC, there's people within that may actually think they're fighting for some good thing or stopping racism. So I never like to make it a broad brush statement, because I always find those to be ignorant. But in a general sense, from the leadership, the origins of the ADL come from a pretty disgusting story that we don't have to get into, but it was a lie. Let's put it that way. The story about what happened and where it started from was based on a lie and a cover-up of something that happened from the founder, where they actually ended up having a black guy take the fall, and it's a whole story. But at the end of the day, it stems forward to today, where we can see provably that they are having people censored with, let's just take Twitter, for example, for things, first of all, even if you disagree with them, that are not against the law, right? Hate speech is not a crime. It is a distasteful thing that I'll point out and say, yeah, people that say, any number of the serious things that we could say, well, I think you're a gross person. But guess what? Free speech gives you the right to be a gross person, right? And so ADL steps in and says, oh, well, we don't like these terms and we don't like this. So they strong arm people to get rid of them. And with even the governments, none of this is honest. But then you could take it a step further and realize that what they're doing on a provable basis is censoring people for being critical of the Israeli government, or anybody that is a Zionist, for that matter, which shows you the real picture as far as I'm concerned. And that's just dishonest at its core. So, I've had them, I've seen comments in regard to criticisms of the Israeli government. So let's just say you go, okay, the Israeli government just committed this crime in what they did right there. They will bend it backwards to say, oh, well, what he's saying, wink, wink, is actually a trope spread by this group, and therefore he's a racist and hates Jewish people, and whatever. And the point is that possible? Well, sure, but anything's possible, but that's not the truth. I'm not talking about Jewish people. I'm talking about the Israeli government that just murdered people here, over there, Syrians. How does that have anything to do with you? The point is that they want to make it about something that it's not. And I can say this from a personal perspective. I'm not talking about Jewish people. I'm not talking about racism. I mean, other than the fact that I can prove that Israel and their government, their Zionist government, is openly racist. They absolutely openly spout these things, and you could prove this. And you have every human rights group in the leading human rights groups in the world openly saying Israel's an apartheid state. I mean, the facts are very clear today. The Overton window has been shattered on this conversation, but they just still say, oh, well, you're a racist. You're a secret Jew-hating person because you point out what the Israeli government does. And on top of that, you can show there's both in New York and Israel and all over the world, there are Orthodox Jews that actively speak out about the fact that Zionism is not Judaism. And the fact is they try to conflate it. They say Zionism is Judaism and you can't attack Zionism without being anti-Jewish. And it's not true. The Orthodox Jewish people around the world will stand up and tell you that they're abusing the Jewish religion, Judaism, in order to manipulate people. And then they get beat up by the IDF for doing so, all regularly in Israel. So all these things show you, at the very least, a misrepresentation. I'm not saying there's not racism. I can guarantee you that people that are racist, they're anti-Semites, they're all over the place. But the point is that can't be used to shut down genuine criticism of Zionism or the Israeli government, because that's just simply dishonest. Now, that's one part of what the ADL ultimately does. And I think that most of what they do is disingenuous, in my opinion. Now, if there's groups out there that want to try to deal with racism, you have to engage with this in an honest way. If you're restricting people's speech, you're violating the Constitution. Let's just take it from a U.S. perspective. There's no honest part about that. So if you have some mindset to do things and change things, then go ahead. But if you're doing it in a way that's going to restrict people's free speech and violate their constitutional rights, you're not an honest individual or an honest group. And I think that's the core point.
Absolutely. Well, the next question I think is on that topic you just mentioned. This is a big question. You can try to be as concise as you want, but what do you think needs to happen for there to be peace in the Middle East?
The U.S. government to not be present.
Wow.
Israel not to be present. Pretty simply, right? But I mean, I could go a lot. Obviously, I could talk for 5 hours on that. But I mean, to try to make it as simple as possible, I mean, I think what we're seeing in that area is foreign policy that long before the United States, by the way. The British Empire did the same step, but Africa, Middle East, it's always been the powerful abusing those less powerful for their own benefit. I mean, that's just the way the world has worked, and people try to change that. And I think we kind of got hosed a little bit with the illusion that, or maybe, I tend to think that what happened with the United States in particular was an attempt to do better. And then it very quickly got bastardized by the same people that it always does, power hungry and so on. But what we see today at the very least is power hungry people who are abusing those that are allowing it, or putting false governments in place to be able to reap the resources and everything else in these countries. And if they were let's put it this way, if they were to leave, you would see an instantaneous improvement, but that'd be my opinion. But there's always going to be problems. I mean, that's what the first thing they would do. If they were to leave, they would point at anything that happened and say, see, that's why, the things they ignored before, right? And I think that that's the core point, is people are destabilizing the area for their own benefit.
Yeah. Well, my thought is if they could reverse some of the really bad laws that they put on Palestinians, and if they could obviously stop doing the, pushing people out of their homes and bulldozing them, things like that. And if they could actually maybe do what we did in America, where we paid reparations to Native Americans for what we did. Do you think that might help, or what do you think?
Well, no, I mean, very different situations. I don't think that the Israeli government has an honest intention with what's happening here. And again, it's not my opinion. It's just, it's always, I'm always trying to be objective and engage. There's people out there that don't know the nuances that I believe I can prove in the conversation. So I try to be objective, but the truth is that they're not honest with this. They don't want that. And that's what they will openly say, especially now that the religious Zionism faction of the new coalition, who is openly, I mean, even the ADL called them extremist in the past. Like these groups are openly wanting to bring in some kind of sectarian kind of, like they're trying to bring in like a religious minded government, where like same thing they accuse Iran of doing, right? They're zealots, right? They're out there trying to, and that's what the Israeli population is protesting against. They're literally trying to protest against these judicial reforms because it's going to turn this country into something that's, I mean, look, it's not a democracy today. It's just not. You can't box out parts of your population and pretend like you're a democracy, even if we should want a democracy, a different conversation. But they're going to go into a theocracy. That's where they're going. That's what they want. And Netanyahu's being kind of dragged along because the religious Zionism part of the coalition is why he's in power right now, in my opinion. And I think that that's they're kind of running the show, and they're very extremist. So I think that reparations, in my opinion, are never a positive step, because what you're doing is charging people that have nothing to do with what once happened for something that's happening today. Now, I'm not saying that there's not, there are people doing that with good intentions, I argue, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's the way it is. I just don't think throughout history that ever solves a problem, and I think that the moment that is initiated, that there's always people trying to abuse that, and I mean like the government. There's people using this against us and manipulating that. So I think what you need is just to stop. You know what I mean? Like we don't need to look. If you go back to the reparations point, if we're talking like there's nuance to that conversation to the end of time. People will always dispute different parts of who was at fault and what happened. It's another mire. It'll end up being the same thing we get with the two-state solution, where it ends up just going to talks that go on forever. And then the parties that don't want it to happen will make sure it doesn't happen. And then we'll be distracted by some other story and it'll never go forward. Like that's what ultimately happens. Today, the Israeli government is outwardly going, we will never, ever allow a two-state solution. And then Biden will come up and say, they want a two-state solution. I mean, it's amazing. And so the people in the U.S. go, oh, you're fighting against what they don't want that. They're openly telling us that, So I just think we need to get to a place to where these people are not the ones calling the shots. You can't you can't have a negotiation with somebody who has no intention of actually negotiating. Let's put it that way.
I think that's a good point. I'm pretty idealistic, so I'd like to see good, or let's say better people, that are reasonable, try to work through the problems. But you're right. This has been going on for decades.
Yeah, let me put it that way. Let's ask that question. Isn't that arguably what's been happening? Right? I mean, because the problem is that when it devolved, like, let's just go back to the earlier days of this before, but it always surges throughout the years of, you have another rise up, and it's conflicts and clashes, they always call it, when you're dealing with a group that is literally in an open air prison that has basically no ability. The core point that I always want to include, per the Geneva Conventions and the United Nations, this is an occupied territory. That's not up for debate. They can scream what they want all day long. The international community has always, even people that are swayed by other things have held that. Now, the Geneva Conventions are very clear that if you're in occupied territory, you have the right to armed rebellion. That's an easily provable thing. That's not if you get fired on. That's not if they launch a rocket. You have the right to armed rebellion, period. So it doesn't matter who fired first. We've gotten so far away from the law that now it becomes, well, it's tit for tat, and they started it, and they're the terrorists, so it doesn't matter. And the problem is that it doesn't matter. They have the right to push back because they're occupied. Right? So if we really want to engage with the law and what's right and wrong, then we should go back to the original reality, the non-occupied territory. But then I can acknowledge that that's a problem, because there's all these Israeli people. It's like the same point with reparations. Not every Israeli person is responsible for this. It's not their fault that they have grown up in this area. They shouldn't also then be. So that's where it becomes complicated. But if we really wanted to hold the law, that's the obvious choice. But I agree, there should be some kind of nuance, and that's where the manipulators step in. They won't even allow it to get to that point of the conversation. That's why it's two-state, which means we keep what we took to this point to where it's basically most of it, and then we don't even let that happen. And then as that's not happening, they continue to displace and bulldoze more homes, and all the settlements, every one of them that have happened this entire year and before, are illegal. Not even the Biden administration was like, hey, stop doing that. They don't care. Keep doing it. Right? It's wholesale illegal. We shouldn't engage with people like that, in my opinion.
Right. All right. Well, hopefully I have time for just one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know this is a pretty big subject. All these questions are pretty open-ended questions. So I've seen you talk about insects as bioweapons. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that? Like what you think they're doing with that?
Yeah. I always recommend Truth Stream Media, a great documentary about Plum Island. Just type in Truth Stream Media, Plum Island, it'll pop up. It's a really good documentary that just specifically talks about ticks and the use of them as bioweapons on Plum Island and what that's caused. I mean, and it's interesting in this day and age with how much information we have, and we still can't be honest about the information, which is not they did, and it's documented. They used ticks to be bioweapons. They used to be studying this stuff openly, and that's where Lyme disease comes from. And that's why we pretend like we don't know what this is. And the point is they actually made this happen on Plum Island, and there's so much documentation. It's unbelievable. You can even today, there's like bio level signs. They're like, don't come in here. There's ticks everywhere. Like it's overrun. And now the point is that's been going on a long time, and you can prove this with mosquitoes, with ticks, with fleas. These have been used in the past. So the point is today, what does that mean? Oh, and one more point, actually, we shouldn't forget that closer to today, I think it was 2016, there was a program called Insect Allies. And this is where you get into the more technologically advanced level and the dual use concepts. All of the stuff they're doing today, vaccines, mRNA, they're all dual use. And they used to kind of admit that. What it means is that mRNA shot is just a vehicle. The protein that it's delivering, which is super dangerous, the whole damn thing is super dangerous, is the payload, right? Those are terms that are used by Charles Lieber, Robert Langer, and the people that essentially are behind the design of all this. Robert Langer being the co-founder of Moderna, who's been one of the main people in regard to all of this technology, along with Charles Lieber. The point, though, is you could switch that out, right? So if you just put in something that's meant to kill you, that's a weapon. It's pretty simple, right? And on top of that, if you put in something that was meant to maybe get you just sick enough but not kill you, but make you spread a bunch of stuff, like a self-spreading concept, that's what we're actually talking about. And that's not up for debate. Insect Allies is a designed system where they were going, hey, we can program these insects to protect your crops. And I'm telling you, you should look at it. There's an article on TLAV about this. Scientists around the world spoke up, signed a document that said, this is a weapon. We see right through what you're doing. This is dual use technology. And they got quiet about it. They backed away. I guarantee it didn't stop. I can prove to you it didn't stop. The point was, it's the same concept. You can design these insects to deliver problems. You could design those insects to destroy these crops. The point was they made dual use tech. Now that brings it all the way to the delivery payload level of the mRNA stuff. And that's the same concept. But the insect part of this is a very real, and I think in an active sense, part of what they do. We could talk about the mosquito angle, right? I mean, there's a lot of anomalies about this. The idea that they released all these mosquitoes in these specific, New York it was Florida and, was it Florida, New York? Now I'm forgetting. No, is it Texas? I don't know this quote. Definitely Florida and another state where they released these mosquitoes, and then months later, malaria for the first time in 20 years in these areas. And these were mosquitoes that were meant to stop malaria. So the question becomes, was it a mistake? Was that even responsible? They denied that. Or was it something that was made to happen? All the tech is there. So the fact that we would even dismiss that as a conspiracy theory shows you how far away we are from these things. The tech is there. They've done it before, but somehow we're not able to ask these questions. It's just mind-blowing. So I worry about this stuff going forward. I just talked about I think it was called the toxic mosquito release system. I think it's a patent that is designed to basically create these drones that cultivate toxic mosquitoes within this little area, the food they need and everything, and they can go to a certain area and they release it out. They can be designed to kill people, to immunize people, right on the patent, or what's the word they used? Like tranquilize people. And they made a point to say like rioters or civilians. This is a real patent. There's a real discussion. Now, I can't prove to you that it's being used, but I can prove to you that over the Keys, they already use these drones to drop these mosquitoes. They said, don't worry about the drones. Those are just there for your help. And there's a whole article in the Smithsonian about it. So it's like there's so much overlap to that, but it's a real thing. Let's put it that way. They're real. They've studied them. They've used them. Are they being used now? I find it hard to believe they're not.
Wow. Well, man, that's been great. Very insightful information you've been sharing today. Do you have anything else that you want to tell people? Do you have a website or anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on. And I know we unfortunately have limited time today, so let's do this again. Let me know. We'll come back and we'll hit up the other questions.
Yeah.
Just check out the Last American Vagabond.com. The Last American Vagabond.com is the website. That's where you'll find pretty much everything. All of our places we can support, places you can share. We've got our Substack, pretty much every platform. But yeah, just the website's the best. As I always say, I don't know if you have a website or not, but don't let these platforms be the conduit between you and our information, right? Go directly to the source and then go from there. I think that's important. So thanks for having me on, man.
Absolutely, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today, man. It's been very, very helpful.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's good talking with you.
Awesome. Have a good one.
Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share the video with friends and family. You can follow me on Facebook at Untethered Truth Prevails. You can also find me on Twitter at UntetheredVince. If you'd like to give to me financially, you can go to Patreon, and you can find me there at Untethered Creations. I'm also on Venmo, and you can find me if you go to Vince-Barton-1. Once again, I really appreciate you all for joining me, and I wish you good success in the pursuit of truth. Grace and peace to you all.